We're sort of upset by the scientists not popularizing or putting their views out there. There was an excellent show you may have seen, others may have seen, on Charlie Rose, where James Watson and E.O. Wilson were the people talking. Both of them put out new editions of Darwin's books with their comments. Mm-hmm. And E.O. Wilson didn't have much to say about this, but James Watson unabashedly comes out with the idea that he absolutely doesn't see God fitting in anywhere. Okay, he's an atheist, or he's, whatever his position is. And he said all his friends also, he could think of only one friend who could mix the two. And
I'm not sure that James Watson really has a large circle of friends.
All right.
Point taken, though.
Okay, well, maybe the one friend who did believe is passed is correct, but at any rate, the question I have here, though, is in the way this meeting started too, with a prayer, is somehow it's seen as not, to be a scientist, you're almost afraid in the United States, maybe not in England, to say that you're an atheist, and you seem to want to promote the idea that you're a Roman Catholic. I guess the question is, how do those two things jive, and how do they work with you and your mind?
Yeah, sure. I don't intend to promote the idea that I'm a Roman Catholic. I mention it. I am unaware of scientists in the United States who tell me that they are afraid to say that they are atheist or agnostic, because they say that all the time. There was a very interesting survey of the scientific profession and religious belief that was done by Ed Larson, and I forget who the other author was. But it was published, I believe, in Nature, or was it in Science? In Science or Nature, just a couple years ago. And one of the things they discovered, there was a similar survey surveying the scientific profession in the United States in 1917 or 1918. And what it showed is that in 1917 or 1918, about 40% of the scientific profession professed some sort of a belief in what could be construed to be a personal God. And that percentage was about the same today. So there is this consistency of belief in the scientific community. It's less than 50%. I don't think that's necessarily surprising. Scientists are skeptical. I tell my students that the first virtue of science is skepticism, so it's not surprising that scientists are skeptical about all sorts of things. But I do think that most people within the scientific community have come to accept the notion that one can be a genuinely religious person in the traditional Abrahamic sense and still be fully accepting of science as a way to learn about the natural world. And if James Watson would accept that, then I'd be very happy with him. He may see no place for God in his view of the world. I do. That means we differ on matters of philosophy and theology, but I don't think it necessarily means we differ on matters of science. Over here. Yes.
Yeah, I liked a lot of what you said. I thought it was good in terms of relating this attack on evolution by the ID and that section of the religious fundamentalist right. What I guess I'd like you to speak to would be, and I'm also part of, I write for the Revolution newspaper, and I also am part of World Can't Wait, Drive Out the Bush Regime. I think we are living in the time of the rise of fascism in Germany. I think that, people like Robertson, Bennett, the genocidal comments about black people by Bennett, all these things that are clustered around the Bush regime, I think, and I think you speak to the dangers in terms of science. I just wondered how you saw this whole array and how science fits into it, and the battle in Dover and other places, including Ohio, Kansas, are critical to actually beating back the rise of fascism.
Well, you've invited me to make a provocative political speech, and I hope you wouldn't mind too much if I declined the invitation. I personally do not think that the times in the United States today are comparable to Germany in the 30s, if only because I think Americans are cognizant of what happened in Germany in the 30s and absolutely determined not to let it happen. And I would think that the court rulings that we've seen in Georgia and in Pennsylvania are a good example of the fact that we have an independent judiciary and we have people who are willing to stand up against this movement. I think, to be perfectly honest, I really don't want to increase the politicization of science by arguing that science is against one political party or against one particular point of view. To me, the great virtue of science has always been that it is apolitical. And what I see that worries me right now in this country is the tendency to politicize science, to pretend that science and scientific rationalism is an idea that belongs on one side of the political spectrum. I think that's intellectually wrong, and I think it's enormously destructive to science. And my own determination, I know what I'll do when I go in the voting booth, but my own determination in the public sense is to fight for scientific rationalism, and that's what I think this battle is really all about.
Anybody over here, so Patricia doesn't have to run around too much?
Do you think there's a place for satire, or do you think it would be counterproductive? There was a website a little while ago in which a group...
The Flying Spaghetti Monster?
Exactly.
I think...
Although it would energize a lot of us in the States probably and elsewhere by the embarrassment that would show up in what's happening. But maybe it would solidify the opposition. What do you think? I'm not going to speculate on which tactic will work or solidify the opposition. The only thing I can tell you is that I'm a great fan of satire. I hope we never abandon humor as a tool to sort of lubricate our discussions of difficult issues. And I think one of the particular reasons why I have recommended Judge Jones's decision, in other words, go and read it, is because parts of it are really funny. And I think that's a saving grace.
Just down in front here. But yeah, here and then.
Yeah, the physicist in the front row. Okay.
Well, yeah.
He has been quiet. That's good.
Yeah, that's very good. So as this debate has continued, I particularly become more sensitive, as you know, in writing things with you, in fact, to the fact that science and religion can coexist. But at the same time, as often is pointed out to me when I talk on this subject, it's really a little bit disingenuous to argue that there is no tension. And in fact...
Oh, I wouldn't argue that for a second, yeah.
But I think scientists have to be more sensitive than we are. The fact that while a lot of this is, in fact, a lot of the reaction that you discuss is based on fear of science as the basis of the morality and everything, it's also based on a fear which is not completely displaced, that science is in fact a threat to religious belief. Because it is, in fact, as a well-known atheist physicist, Steve Weinberg, has said, science does not make it impossible to believe in God, it just makes it possible to not believe in God. And it really is science in some sense that without science everything's a miracle. And I think unless scientists are sensitized a little bit to the fact that science does present at some level to people a threat or perceived threat to their religious beliefs, then if we overlook that, then we tend to be blasé, and sometimes, in fact, counterproductive. An example, the best example I can think of is in debating John Calvert, who's head of the ID Network. He always brings up this letter from 40 Nobel laureates about evolution, which says there is no evidence for design. And, of course, that's not true. There's no evidence for design and purpose to the universe, and that's just not a scientific statement. And if scientists make those kind of statements, it naturally sort of encourages the fear of science. And so I think we have to be particularly sensitive that science is threatened.
I will just second your comment. I think they're very wisely chosen.
Right here in front, right behind you there.
And perhaps Dr. Springhauser perhaps could answer this about Ohio in particular. If Dover had its elections and changed the political spectrum there, what's the next step in Ohio? Do we know when the standards are being revised? I know that records have been requested in preparation perhaps for a lawsuit, but somebody could answer.
I think that's you.
Okay. The situation here is complicated.